Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, Chapter 6, Invitation to the White House. The President of the United States will now address you, announced the loudspeaker voice in the lobby of the Space Hotel. Grandma Georgina's head peeped cautiously out from under the sheets. Grandma Josephine took her fingers out of her ears, and Grandpa George lifted his face from the pillow. "You mean he's actually going to speak to us?" whispered Charlie. "Shh," said Mr. Wonka. "Listen." "Dear friends," said the well-known presidential voice over the loudspeaker. Dear friends. Welcome to Space Hotel, USA. Greetings to the brave astronauts from Mars and Venus." "Mars and Venus?" whispered Charlie. "You mean he thinks we're from—" "Shh, shh, shh," said Mr. Wonka. He was doubled up with slight laughter, shaking all over from one foot to another. "You have come a long way," the president continued, "so why don't you come just a tiny bit further and pay us a visit down here on this humble little earth? I invite all 8 of you to stay with me here in Washington as my honored guests. You could land that wonderful glass space machine of yours on the lawn in the back of the White House. We shall have the red carpet out and ready. I do hope you know enough of our language to understand me. I shall wait most anxiously for your reply." There was a click, and the president went off the air. "What a fantastic thing!" whispered Grandpa Joe. "The White House, Charlie! We're invited to the White House as honored guests." Charlie caught hold of Grandpa Joe's hands, and the two of them started dancing around and round the lobby of the hotel. Mr. Wonka, still shaking with laughter, went and sat down on the bed and signaled everyone to gather round so they could whisper without being heard by the hidden microphones. "They're scared to death," he whispered. "They won't bother us any more now. So let's have that feast we were talking about, and afterwards we can explore the hotel." "Aren't we going to the White House?" whispered Grandma Josephine. "I want to go to the White House and stay with the president." My dear old Dotty Dumpling," said Mr. Wonka, "you look as much like a man from Mars as a bedbug. They'd know at once they'd been fooled. We'd be arrested before we could say, 'How do you do?'" Mr. Wonka was right. There could be no question of accepting the president's invitation, and they all knew it. "But we've got to say something to him," Charlie whispered. "He must be sitting down there in the White House this very minute waiting for an answer." "Make an excuse," Mr. Bucket said. "Tell him we're otherwise engaged," said Mrs. Bucket. "Ask him for a rain check," said Grandpa Joe. "You're right," whispered Mr. Wonka. "It is rude to ignore an invitation." He stood up and walked a few paces from the group. For a moment or two he remained quite still, gathering his thoughts. Then once again Charlie saw those tiny twinkling, smiling wrinkles around the corners of his eyes, and when he began to speak, his voice this time was like the voice of a giant, deep, devilish, very loud and very slow. "In the quelchy, quaggly sogmire, in the mashy, midious harshland, at the witchy hour of gloomness, all the grobes come oozing home. You can hear them softly sliming, glissing, hissing o'er the slubber, all those oily boily bodies, oozing onward in the gloam. So start to run, oh skid and daddle, through the slubber, slush and slossel, skip, jump, hop, and try to scattle, all the grobes are on the roam." In his study 240 miles below, Mr. President turned as white as the White House. Jumping jackrabbits!" he cried. "I think they're after us." "Oh, please, let me blow them up," said the ex-chief of the army. "Silence," said Miss Tibbs. "Go stand in the corner." In the lobby of the Space Hotel, Mr. Wonka had merely paused in order to think up a new verse, and he was just about to start off again when a frightful, piercing scream stopped him cold. The screamer was Grandma Josephine. She was sitting up in bed and pointing with a shaking finger at the elevators at the far end of the lobby. She screamed a second time, still pointing, and all eyes turned towards the elevators. The door of one of the elevators on the left was sliding slowly open, and the watchers could clearly see that there was something thick, something brown, something not exactly brown, but greenish brown, something with slimy skin and large eyes, squatting inside the elevator.